This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Mosaic, a daily news program from Link TV, presents a selection of news reports from independent and state-controlled broadcasters from throughout the Middle East.
و55 وحدة سكنية جديدة سيشرع في بنائها منذ اليوم.
The Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak has given the green light for the construction of 455 housing units in the West Bank settlements. The resolution, which was approved yesterday by the Israeli government, has sounded off alarm bells within the Palestinian Authority, which condemn the move as a setback to the peace process. The decision for the construction could also be a cover-up for the delay of the visit by the U.S. Mideast Special Envoy to Israel. Our correspondent Shalit Assad reports from Jerusalem.
مراسلتنا شروق أسعد من القدس.
The latest Israeli announcement has come to reassure the settlers and soothe the anger inside Netanyahu's right-wing coalition. Israel's announcement contained political messages. Among the most prominent was a message to the U.S. President Barack Obama.
Israel's arrogance has exceeded the limit. Israel approved the construction of hundreds of settlement units. This announcement comes ahead of the United States-Israeli agreement on a temporary and partial settlement freeze. This shows that the United States administration is incompetent and unable to convince Israel of halting its settlement campaign.
The Israeli announcement comes ahead of a visit to Israel by the U.S. Mideast Special Envoy George Mitchell. It also comes ahead of a three-way summit between the U.S. President Netanyahu and President Abbas on the sidelines of the UN National Assembly meeting at the end of the month. Palestinians and neighboring Arabs believe that the issue of the settlement freeze is the key to ensure the success of the U.S.-sponsored summit.
This decision to build more settlements is posing a real threat to the entire peace process. This decision also pushes us to uphold our position in the negotiations and the peace process.
Israel is saying that Netanyahu has consulted with the U.S. each step of the way, and that Mitchell did not postpone his visit to Israel in protest, but to finalize the U.S.-Israel agreement on the settlement issue. According to the agreement, Israel will halt its settlement activities for 6 to 9 months in exchange for normalizing relations between Israel and the Arabs. It seems that the U.S. has redirected its efforts, focusing more attention on the Arab nations and the Palestinians than on Israel. The Palestinian Authority is left with two bitter choices. One is to accept Israel's proposal and attend the three-way meeting with Obama and Netanyahu, and the other choice is to reject the proposal and boycott the meeting. Meanwhile, Netanyahu is seeking to please his right-wing coalition and Washington at the same time. Shalit Assad, Dubai TV, Occupied Jerusalem.
قرارات الحكومة الإسرائيلية المتعنتة تتطلب موقفا عربيا.
The rigid resolutions of the Israeli government require the Arabs to take a firm and united position. These were the words of the head of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. During a meeting last night with the Saudi monarch, King Abdullah bin Abdulaziz, Abbas said that Israel's decision to resume the construction of settlements is a major setback for the peace process. He further said that the Palestinians will not return to the bargaining table until Israel revokes this decision.
إلى حين عدول إسرائيل عن قرارها.
Meanwhile, in Cairo, the Palestinian brothers continue to look for another opportunity to reconcile their differences. Hamas warned the U.S. administration against yielding to Israeli demands in exchange for a temporary settlement freeze, as this will not help improve relations between the Arabs and the Israeli state. Meanwhile, the Secretary General of the Arab League, Amir Moussa, who met with the head of the Hamas political office, Khalid Mishal, rejected the U.S. plan for normalizing relations with Israel. Moussa and Mishal discussed the Palestinian reconciliation issue, as well as the Arab position on Israel, in addition to the prisoner exchange deal. Ahmed Al-Kilani reports from Cairo.
He was sharp and direct. This is how the head of the Hamas political office, Khalid Mishal, was described as he stood to give a speech in Cairo. Mishal met separately with the head of the Egyptian intelligence service, Lieutenant General Omar Suleiman, and the Secretary General of the Arab League, Amir Moussa. The leaders discussed the issues of Palestinian national reconciliation, the Arab-Israeli conflict, as well as the prisoner exchange deal with Israel. Mishal has sent several messages, with a special one for Ramallah.
No presidential or legislative elections will be held unless the Palestinians reach an agreement and reconciliation. We reject holding elections under the current circumstances because this will eventually lead to the exclusion of Gaza by limiting the elections process to the West Bank.
Rejecting the normalization of relations between the Arabs and Israel was the common denominator in the positions of Mishal and Moussa.
I doubt that any Arab government will offer the possibility of normalization on a silver platter to Israel, which has not changed its position on the issue of the settlement freeze. The Israeli Prime Minister rejected the U.S. proposal yesterday.
The Hamas leader has preemptively rejected any U.S. proposals for dealing with the Palestinian plight that do not meet Hamas's expectations.
What Obama is seeking to propose at the end of the month on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly meeting will be scrutinized by Hamas. However, we will not accept any temporary settlement freeze in exchange for resuming negotiations and normalizing relations with Israel.
All have agreed that national reconciliation is the basis from which the Palestinians must launch their efforts, internally and externally. Meanwhile, many are holding high hopes for the Egyptian mediation efforts. Egypt is expected to broker a solution within a week at the most. However, the atmosphere surrounding the national reconciliation is leaning toward more complication rather than consensus.
A short time ago, Iran was scheduled to hand over new proposals to representatives of the major powers in order to resolve the standoff over its nuclear program. Tehran said the package of proposals has been updated in light of developments in the world. The material will be given to envoys from Britain, France, Russia, China, the United States, and Germany, which are acting on behalf of the international community. Tehran has been told it has until late this month to enter into talks or face a fourth set of UN sanctions. This latest move comes as the International Atomic Energy Agency holds week-long meetings in Vienna. The American representative told the UN body today that Washington believes Iran has enough enriched uranium to make a nuclear weapon and that it is extremely concerned that the country is very close to producing one. IAEA Chief Mohammed El-Baradei said Iran continues to defy Security Council ultimatums to suspend uranium enrichment, a key step in the manufacture of nuclear weapons.
Iran has not suspended its enrichment-related activities or its work on heavy water-related projects as required by the Security Council, nor has Iran implemented the additional protocol. Likewise, Iran has not cooperated with the agency in connection with the remaining issues detailed fully and completely in the agency's reports, which need to be clarified in order to exclude the possibility of there being military dimensions to Iran's nuclear program.
Here at home, tragedy was averted today when 4 cars of a train heading to Tel Aviv from Beersheba derailed near Kiryat Gat. The carriages went off the tracks but did not turn over. Rescue teams were rushed to the scene. Several people were lightly injured and over 20 others were treated for shock. The cause of the accident is still unclear. The Israel Railways authorities appointed a special committee to investigate the incident. Well, amid ongoing reports of a deal to secure the release of Gilad Shalit, a letter written by the kidnapped IDF soldier during his first month of captivity was released for publication. It's not clear how the letter, which was delivered to Shalit's parents shortly after their son's abduction, made its way to the media. IBA's Aaron Viner brings us the story.
This is the first letter and sign of life from IDF soldier Gilad Shalit to his family, apparently written during his first month of captivity and delivered to his parents in September of 2006, just 3 months after his capture. In the letter, believed to have been dictated by his captors, Gilad writes, "To my mother and father, brothers and friends, I send you regards. My health is deteriorating daily. I am especially struggling emotionally, and my situation is causing me great depression. I await the end of this intolerable and inhuman nightmare." The letter was reportedly given to a Channel 2 journalist who is currently writing a book on the Shalit abduction by Gilad's father, Noam, who asked that it not be published in any form. Although little new information is revealed in the letter, the family was distraught when it was mysteriously leaked to the press. It remains unclear at this time how that occurred. Negotiations for Shalit's release have so far been utterly unsuccessful. When Hamas political boss Khalid Mashal left Egypt earlier this week, saying that Shalit's release is a long way off, a Hamas delegation is now in Cairo, resuming talks through German mediation. Gaza sources earlier this week disclosed that Hamas held talks with a Norwegian security official over the number of potential Palestinian prisoners exchanged for Shalit that would be permitted deportation to Norway. According to the latest reported exchange numbers, Israel would release 450 Palestinians if Shalit is transferred to Egyptian authorities. An additional 550 prisoners would be freed when Shalit reaches Israeli soil. Despite frequent media reports, it remains unknown if and when such a deal securing the release of Israel's captive soldier will take place. This is Erin Viner for IBA News.
أبناء قطاع غزة يتحدون الاحتلال وآثاره المدمرة بإعادة بناء.
People of the Gaza Strip are defying the occupation and its destructive effects by reconstructing their houses that were destroyed by the Israeli occupation. This time they're using the retrieved materials from their destroyed houses, hoping that they will have a shelter that will protect them from the coming cold winter, instead of waiting for unfulfilled promises. Our correspondent in Gaza reports a new chapter of this story of defiance.
The reconstruction of Gaza has been long delayed, and this word means nothing to the Palestinians because nothing has materialized. Since the war until now, no reconstruction projects have been carried out to rehouse the Palestinians who have been living out in the open. In today's Gaza, with the delay of reconstruction, victims of the war had no other way but to try and retrieve bricks and steel from their collapsed houses to rebuild at least one room.
In fact, we have done some research with other engineers and found that this steel is not suitable for reliable construction. This steel can only be used for flooring purposes or to build walls that are 10 centimeters thick.
Even though the execution of the project is difficult due to the limited resources and modest local capabilities, the Palestinians here believe that the project cleans up large areas that have been covered by rubble so it can be used for good purposes. Moreover, the useful materials that have been retrieved from the rubble can be used to at least build a humble room to shelter kids.
Actually, we have had success with a number of projects, but that does not solve the reconstruction crisis in Gaza. Perhaps we can build a simple home. The security agencies have started to carry out some projects for themselves. Some houses have been built, but this does not solve our imminent need for houses. We need to construct buildings to accommodate the large population due to the lack of space in the Gaza Strip.
Despite these local efforts, the Palestinians continue to plead that international aid be sent to Gaza so that they can take necessary measures to decrease people's pain. Regardless of whether the reconstruction takes a long time or not, from the perspective of the Palestinian people in Gaza, the reconstruction projects are meaningless because they have failed to rebuild what the occupation has destroyed. Residents of Gaza think that reconstruction will not be achieved until crossing points are opened or innovative ways are found to rebuild the destroyed homes.
Hi, I'm Cindy Im. Did you know that Mosaic, the show that you're watching, is almost completely viewer-supported? This is the one time of the year that we raise money specifically for Mosaic. With that support, we can continue our uncensored reporting through the end of the year. Our goal is $200,000 and we still have a long way to go. We know we can do it because we know how much our viewers value Mosaic. So when you're done watching this episode, consider making a donation to keep programs like Mosaic alive. Thank you.
The Arab League Secretary General, Amer Moussa, is supposed to meet with the Iraqi Foreign Minister, Ushir Zuberi, and Syrian Foreign Minister, Walid Muallim, in an attempt to contain the conflict that emerged between the two countries.
Zuberi stressed the importance of the Arab League's role in containing the crisis and said that his country is open to all options that would rebuild confidence between Syria and Iraq and normalize their relations. In Baghdad, the head of the Council of Ministers called for containing the crisis between Baghdad and Damascus and resolving their differences through diplomatic channels.
Iraqi officials are using different language today. After weeks of an escalation in verbal and political tension with Damascus, Baghdad has started taking diplomatic steps toward resolving differences between Baghdad and Syria. This dispute between them emerged after the Bloody Wednesday explosions in Baghdad.
We
are open and have a special vision of how we can build confidence between us and Syria and normalize our relations. The political systems in the two countries must be respected without any interventions.
حديث زباري استبق بموقف مماثل لمجلس الرئاسة العراقي مضمونه نزع فتيل.
Zuberi's speech was preceded by a speech by the head of the Iraqi Council of Ministers, in which he called for the ending of the crisis between Baghdad and Damascus diplomatically. This shows that the Iraqi Council of Ministers no longer accuses Syria of being behind the Bloody Wednesday explosions, an accusation that was made earlier against Syria by the Iraqi government. The Council of Ministers called for transferring the case of the Bloody Wednesday explosions to the Security and Defense Committee in the Iraqi parliament, so it can evaluate the evidence and information pertaining to the case. This move was preceded by Turkish and Iranian mediation, though it seemed for a while that these efforts were not sufficient to stop Baghdad from escalating the situation. The crisis between Iraq and Syria peaked when al-Maliki stationed additional forces along the Iraqi-Syrian border and sent a memorandum to the UN demanding the establishment of a criminal court to investigate what he called crimes against humanity. The Iraqi Council of Ministers reiterated that the aim of the Wednesday explosions was to destabilize the situation in Iraq, but it warned against making accusations before the evidence is investigated. Zuberi's statements mark a policy change toward the crisis with Syria. However, this change in policy has created contradictions in the Iraqi political discourse.
Joining me from the headquarters of the Arab League, Al Jazeera Bureau Chief Hussein Abdelghani. How successful are the attempts to end Iraqi and Syrian differences?
I think that the reconciliation efforts are as successful as the reporter has said. Our information indicates that the Syrians are also trying to calm the situation. The Syrians who will preside over the coming session will behave in a way that will calm the situation and resolve the problem. They will not try to escalate the situation and complicate it. We have learned that the Syrian Foreign Minister, Walid al-Muallim, who will give the opening speech at 5 p.m. Cairo time, will not talk about any kind of tension between Iraq and Syria. He will also not talk about any differences with Iraq or any other Arab country.
Well, final results from Afghanistan's presidential election are expected to be delayed. The Electoral Complaints Commission says the results are not likely to be released on September 17th because tallying the vote is taking too long. The commission says final results cannot be ratified until all complaints are investigated. The probe began after candidates and critics accused President Hamid Karzai of vote rigging. The latest results show Karzai has won 54% of the votes from almost 92% of polling stations. This gives him enough votes to win without a runoff. Karzai's main challenger, Abdullah, has won over 28% of the votes. Abdullah is accusing the Electoral Commission of allowing irregularities in favor of Karzai. Well, a British soldier serving with the NATO-led forces has lost his life in Afghanistan. The soldier was killed during a commando raid to free a New York Times reporter and his Afghan interpreter, who were kidnapped last week. The two had been kidnapped while covering a NATO airstrike on Taliban forces in northern Kunduz province. Stephen Farrell is unhurt, but the interpreter was killed in the crossfire. The kidnapping had been kept quiet by the newspaper and most major news organizations out of concern for the men's safety. And continuing with Afghanistan, a bomb attack on a NATO base in that country has reportedly killed at least 2 civilians. Several foreign and local troops have also been injured. The bomb went off outside a British NATO base in the southern province of Helmand. The number of civilian casualties has not been confirmed, and it may rise as investigation continues. This is the latest attack on an international military base in Afghanistan. And on Tuesday, another bomb explosion outside a NATO airport killed 3 civilians and wounded 9 people, including foreign soldiers.
The Afghan Journalists Guild condemned the killing of the Afghan journalist Sultan Monadi, who was translating for the British journalist Stephen Farrell. NATO carried out a military operation to free the 2 journalists after they were kidnapped. Stephen Farrell was freed, but Monadi was killed during the operation.
British journalist Stephen Farrell was freed in a military operation by NATO forces after he was kidnapped by armed groups. The secretive operation included gunfire exchange, during which 1 British soldier and the Afghan journalist Sultan Monadi were killed. Monadi was kidnapped along with his British colleague Farrell. Last Saturday, armed men kidnapped the 2 journalists at gunpoint from this vehicle. There was clear evidence of the kidnapping found inside the vehicle. The 2 journalists were on their way back from northern Afghanistan after they covered a story on pirated oil tankers. At the time, dozens of Afghan civilians were killed by airstrikes that were intended for the armed men. The freed New York Times journalist Stephen Farrell reported on the rescue operations and its result on the newspaper's website. Farrell said that he'd heard people talking in English and Afghan dialects. This is not the first time he was kidnapped. He was also kidnapped in Iraq.
I
was driving my car on the outskirts of Al-Fallujah when armed and masked men stopped me. They shot at the car and the tires and then took me by force to an abandoned building in Iraq. I felt that we had an opportunity to survive unless we made a big mistake, because we are civilians. We are journalists.
We're civilians, we're journalists.
It seems that Stephen Farrell is one of the journalists who are not deterred by risks and challenges. So far, he's been lucky when compared with many other journalists who paid dearly with their lives, especially journalists living in countries torn by conflict.
The international financial crisis has had little effect on the international weapons trade. The U.S. is still the biggest exporter of weapons in the world, especially to developing countries.
Despite the international financial crisis, which caused the sale of weapons to decrease last year, the U.S. has strengthened its position as the biggest exporter of weapons in the world. The U.S. exports more than 2/3 of all weapons that are sold in the international markets. According to a congressional study, the U.S. has signed weapons deals amounting to $38 billion in 2008, which comprise 68% of all weapons sold in the world. U.S. weapons sales increased by $25 billion from the year before. The increase in weapons sold by the United States is the exception to the rule at a time when the world markets are stagnant. U.S. weapons sales to developing countries have reached $42 billion. The U.S. signed $30 billion worth of weapons deals, which amounts to 70% of the total amount of weapons sold to developing countries. The biggest deal was signed with the United Arab Emirates with an estimated value of $10 billion. The U.S. also sold Morocco $2 billion worth of warplanes. The question is why Morocco and other Arab countries need to buy these kinds of weapons. Why are they wasting their resources on weapons and depriving their citizens of development, especially when considering that they are not going to enter into ideological wars to defend their dignity at this time? The United States sells 2/3 of the world's total weapons export, and it contributes to escalating tensions in already tense areas. At the same time, it fuels the concern of Arab countries about Iran. Yes, weapons can make men more respected, but in the United States, they are used to create ethnic strife.
It seems that the United Arab Emirates is willing to acquire more weapons even from as far as China. The Indian authorities found explosives and weapons on a military plane from the United Arab Emirates that was supposed to go to China. Initially, we thought that the plane was destined for Gaza, but it went to Calcutta instead.
"14 people drowned and others went missing when flash floods swept through northeastern Turkey. Heavy rain, accompanied by strong winds, also swept over agricultural fields, flooding some areas, homes and vehicles, and destroying bridges and roads.
Get more news about the Middle East online at linktv.org/Mosaic. The Mosaic webpage offers a complete archive of Mosaic programs, program transcripts, the Mosaic video podcast, and the Mosaic Intelligence Report, a weekly analysis of the hottest stories from the Middle East. The views expressed on Mosaic are those of the participating broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible with the support of viewers like you. Thank you.
This program is brought to you by Link TV for educational and non-commercial use only. Link TV is the only U.S. network dedicated to global and national news, uncompromising documentaries, and diverse cultural programs, programs which connect you to the world.